Yes, good to speak to you again, Vladimir. I hope you're safe. I hope you're doing okay.
Frankly speaking, I don't have many opportunities to speak to the Dutch audience. We are now on the verge of this NATO Summit. The mainstream media, regrettably, is not interested to have the Russian point of view on developments. Russia and Ukraine are two brotherly nations, two brotherly peoples. 2022, that's not correct. War started in 2014. Shelling of Lugansk and Donetsk by the Ukrainian forces
was also instigated and helped by the CIA as well.
Yeah, certainly.
Weapons of mass destructions.
They were never found. The attacks of Israel, we call on both parties to stop this exchange of strikes. More dangerous now than it used to be in the period of the Cold War. If people speak to each other, maybe they will find a solution. We don't have any dialogue.
Lieve vrienden, wat een reis. De Trueman Show is uitgegroeid tot een community van meer dan 100.000 abonnees op YouTube. En dat is allemaal te danken aan jullie. Dankjewel dat je kijkt, luistert, meedenkt en meereist. We gaan natuurlijk gewoon door met heel veel energie, met nieuwe gasten, diepe gesprekken en thema's die er echt toe doen. Elke week weer. En om dat te blijven doen, om onafhankelijk te blijven, om de podcast nog sterker te maken, mooier en impactvoller te maken, zijn we actief op zoek naar partners die deze missie willen ondersteunen. Samenwerkingen die kloppen, die waarde toevoegen. Voor jullie als luisteraar en kijker, voor de partners die aansluiten en voor ons als de Trueman Show. Dus heb je ook een bedrijf of merk dat resoneert met wat we doen? Stuur dan gerust een mailtje naar partners@thetruemanshow.com. We staan altijd open voor mooie verbindingen. En speciaal voor iedereen die liever naar de show kijkt zonder advertenties, ook aan jullie hebben we gedacht. Via het streamingplatform van That's the Spirit kan je namelijk al onze afleveringen bekijken zonder onderbrekingen. Geen advertenties, gewoon alleen het gesprek. En dat niet alleen, je kan hier ook het exclusieve segment Uncensored checken, waarin ik met gasten nog dieper duik en bepaalde thema's en exclusieve documentaires en films bekijken die je nergens anders ziet. Word nu lid via thatspirit.nu en probeer het nu 1 week gratis uit. Het mooie is, wanneer je lid wordt, steun je ook de show, het team en help je ons om de podcast verder te laten groeien. Enorm bedankt daarvoor. En dan nu heel veel plezier met de aflevering van deze week. So thank you so much for being here today. I think for us, we are really excited for having you over because I think it's super important, especially in times in the media where you hear one side of the story all the time, repeatedly. And it's for us as a Trueman Show, as a media outlet, we are not here to tell this story is true or that story is true, but we think it's super important to hear at least 2 sides of a story so that people can make up their own minds. And it seems like in these times that people don't think that, or governments don't think that people are able to make up their own minds anymore. But they're always 2 sides of the story, yeah? So that's why we're happy to have you over, and hopefully we can talk about that today a little bit.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And for me, it's really an honor and a pleasure to address the Dutch audience, the Dutch public, because, frankly speaking, I don't have many opportunities to speak to the Dutch audience because the mainstream media, regrettably, is not interested to have the Russian position, Russian point of view on the world developments. It's only the Western position that is being somehow put forward, yes. And I am very rarely, or if not never, invited to give the comments on what is happening. So I am really happy for this opportunity, and thank you very much.
Thank you. So you're here since 2024, right?
Yeah.
So that's, let's say, a year now.
A year and a half.
Year and a half already.
A year and a half.
And in that year and a half, there's a lot of stuff going on between Ukraine and Russia and everything. So you would say a lot of news being made in the Western media and the Dutch media about it. And you tell me that there's no media outlet who asks you any questions about, for example, the Ukraine situation.
No. Mainstream media never asked me about the Ukrainian situation and never expressed any interest to hear the Russian point of view on it.
That's like, you can't imagine that would happen, yeah? Like in such a topic, like the Dutch medias are like fully printed with everything that's happening in the Ukraine, and that none of them had called you to ask the questions about it.
Yeah, regrettably no. And when I speak to Dutch officials and when I try to also to explain our point of view, the answer is usually like this. Yes, we know your position. But our position is different. And then there is a repetition of well-known just approaches, so it's not a kind of it's not a discussion. It's just an exchange of, statements.
You have your side, I have my side.
Yeah,
and
that's it. That's it.
And do you think they know your side of the story?
Well, I presume because certainly not regrettably the public, probably the common people who are absolutely do not have any access to the Russian media. They're all banned here, but those the politicians, the people who formulate Dutch foreign policy, I suppose they know the Russian position, but they do not take it into account,
And like, how is it for you? Because you say like the typically like the Dutch people, they don't have access to your side of the story. How is it to be ambassador in the Netherlands right now? Because Dan, he was with you this week, I think even yesterday, and he told us about the Ukraine flags and like pictures of war stuff and everything going on in front of the embassy. So that feels like a little bit hostile, even, or not?
Yes, it's not easy. Really, it's not easy to be an ambassador here in the Netherlands because the environment is not friendly. No, yes, you mentioned that we have this demonstration of Ukrainian flags opposite our gates. It's for the last 3 years we have it. Yeah, each day they put it, and then in the evening they bring it. They remove it, and they bring it back, and it's approved by the authorities. A kind of a just demonstration. We are, frankly, we do not pay much attention to it. We get used to it, And it's, in our opinion, it's a manifestation of weakness, It's not a manifestation of a kind of a just being sure in their own position. To demonstrate a flag in spite before the gates or of the foreign mission, it's not a bad. It's not a good manner, we do not pay much attention to it. But yes, we have not much contacts with the public officials, and we do not have much dialogue with the government officials, with the politicians. But I don't see any hostility or any just unfriendly attitude from ordinary Dutch people. I was never offended somewhere in the street, and when I say that I am Russian, there is always a smile, and so Dutch public is absolutely adequate.
So you think it's not the Dutch public who they're point of view of the Russians is that way. It's just like the politicians
Yeah, the
and
politicians,
media.
they formulate it and they impose this position on the Dutch public.
Ja. Ik kreeg de laatste tijd opvallend vaak dezelfde tip. Jorn, je moet echt eens naar de Spiriplayer kijken. Het is een klein, draagbaar apparaatje dat solfeggio-frequenties uitzendt. Klinkt misschien wat spiritueel, en dat is het ook, maar ik hoor dus van meerdere mensen om me heen dat het echt wat voor hen doet. Vooral bij stress, overprikkeling of moeite met slapen. Ze zetten hem aan en het voelt alsof er even op de pauzeknop wordt gedrukt. Minder ruis in het hoofd, meer rust in je lijf. En het past gewoon in je tas. Je laat hem makkelijk op en je neemt hem zo mee. Thuis, op reis of waar dan ook. Dus als jij voelt dat je zenuwstelsel wel wat ontspanning kan gebruiken, check dan zeker even spiriplayer.com. En nu speciaal voor jou als luisteraar van de Trueman Show met korting te bestellen. Gebruik hiervoor de code TMS. Link staat ook beneden in de show notes. Where do you think that started? Like, is that worse? Obviously, it would be worse now because of what's happening in the Ukraine. But like for me, I have the feeling that as long as I can remember, there's always been one-sided news about Russia and about everything going on in Russia. And I think the last years was a little bit before everything like happened in the Ukraine. It was less, I think, but still. Like, I think we always, in the Dutch media, or the Western media, we always get like the idea that Russia is like the big enemy of the West.
Yeah, regrettably, you know. After the end of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union ceased to exist, we in Russia, we had, frank illusions that there will be a new period in the relations between Russia and the West. We really believed in this new political thinking proclaimed by President Gorbachev, and we really thought that we might have, just a very equal, friendly, and really, just relations that are not hindered by any kind of an ideology. But regrettably, we failed in our expectations because the West, frankly speaking, ever regarded Russia as an enemy.
Do you like, because I had like we had a lady in the podcast and she's a lot in Russia, and she also tried to, like, because she's a lot in Russia, she also tried to, like, she knows a lot of the history, and she tried to tell the audience also a different side as well. And she told me, and maybe you can confirm this, a lot of Russians back then, they really wanted to be part actually of what we have in the West, or maybe don't want to be part, but they want to have good relations and they want to be working together, and that was they wanted to do that.
Yeah. That was the real attitude of the Russian people, just to be part of this European family, but to be an equal member, just that a member whose interests are being taken into account, whose security is being respected, but from the very beginning that went a bit different, and for instance, if we take NATO, especially since we are now on the verge of this NATO Summit, NATO was created in 1949 exclusively to oppose the Soviet Union, as a military bloc that was created to just fight with the Soviet Union. Then the Warsaw Pact was established. It later as a response, by the way, to the creation of NATO. So there was just a kind of a hostility, of opposition, I would say, between the two blocks. Yeah. Then
Why is that, do you think?
Huh?
Why did the West created NATO to why does the West feel such a threat? Or why do they feel threatened a lot by Russia, the Soviet Union?
At that time, there was also a ideological dimension. They were afraid of communism, of communist ideology. But then, when the Soviet Union ceased to exist, when the Warsaw Pact was dissolved, when there was no communist ideology in Russia, just as a ruling ideology, there was absolutely no reason for NATO to continue to exist. But it was quite the opposite. It enlarged, It moved eastwards to our borders. In spite of all the promises that we were given by Chancellor Kohl, by Margaret Thatcher, by President of the United States at that time, it was Bush Senior, So they all assured Gorbachev and then Yeltsin that no, we will not expand. But then they started, and certainly it was absolutely done on an anti-Russian, just stance. There is absolutely no need for NATO to exist and to just continue to exist as a military bloc. But what we see now, we see the enlargement of NATO, and the only reason for this is to create, or just in order to justify the expansion of NATO, one need to create an enemy, and so the West proclaimed Russia as an enemy, as an aggressive state that has some aggressive plans against Europe, against its neighbors, which is absolutely, it has nothing to do with the reality, We numerously, it was our president, and it was stated on all levels that we do not have any aggressive plans to attack any of our neighbors in Europe. We don't need it. And it's our wish to live in a peaceful atmosphere and to develop friendly relations with our neighbors. But certainly when we see the very aggressive stance of countries like Baltic countries, like Finland, for instance, who joined NATO, like Sweden, who joined NATO, we have to react, by preparing our military installations, our military just facilities along our western borders, but it has nothing to do with any aggressive plans. And if we, for instance, take the region of the Baltic Sea, it always only I would say that even in the period of the Cold War, Baltic Sea was the region of cooperation. We had excellent relations in the time of the Soviet Union with Finland, which was our biggest trade partner. And it was always a kind of area of cooperation. What we see now, the area of Baltic Sea is one of the most potentially dangerous regions in just in Europe, where the confrontation can bring a very, very serious crisis.
Lieve vrienden, toen ik That's Spirit begon, zijn we begonnen met het organiseren van evenementen. Ik heb altijd afgezworen om te doen, maar we wilden toch weer mensen bij elkaar brengen naar een hele intense periode. En een van de eerste evenementen die van de plank kwam rollen, was met een knipoog naar mijn danceverleden de strandfeesten. Omdat we toch met elkaar iets anders wilden doen dan alleen maar luisteren naar informatie, maar ook met elkaar lekker wilden dansen, proosten en naar de zonsondergang op het strand wilden kijken. Dit hebben we een aantal keer gedaan met heel veel plezier. En het doet ook een beetje pijn als ik dit ga vertellen. Maar we gaan nog 1 keer samenkomen op 5 juli. De allerlaatste keer het strandfeest. Het mag plaatsmaken voor iets anders. Maar daarom gaan we nog wel 1 keertje met z'n allen keihard genieten op het strand. Met de voetjes in het zand. Kijken naar de zonsondergang. En genieten van elkaar met een lekker drankje erbij. En een tof muziekje. Met een hele dikke line-up. 5 juli de laatste keer. Dus wil je erbij zijn? events.thatspirit.nu. Hopelijk tot dan.
And why is it dangerous for Russia that countries like, for example, Finland and Sweden join NATO?
Well, they're our neighbors, just from the Finnish border to St. Petersburg. It's, I don't know, maybe 60 or 70 kilometers, So maybe more, but not far.
But then you assume that NATO would maybe even want to expand more, or like why is the fact that NATO has or Finland and Sweden joined NATO, is that dangerous for Russia?
Yes, because we have we have common borders, not with Sweden, but with Finland, and for sure very long border, and the Baltic Sea is also, it's a kind of a sea that is used by all states, all adjacent states. It must be the area of cooperation, not an area of confrontation.
Yeah. So, but then, generally speaking, the fact that you don't trust NATO.
No, we don't trust NATO. We were deceived so many times, that for us it's very difficult now to trust this bloc. And it's even difficult for us, frankly speaking, to trust European Union, because we were also deceived numerously by this organization, and now it would be a very long process to restore this confidence.
Yeah. Why do you think that NATO is expanding as they do?
Well, because this organization, in order to exist, it has to create kind of an external threat, and this external threat for NATO is Russia, as it was proclaimed, But certainly we do not pose any threat to NATO. But this expansion poses the threat to our interests.
But certainly you must have an idea on why NATO is expanding as they are doing.
Well, to have my opinion is just to have a full military and political domination in this region. That's it. Yeah, that's it.
And you just told me, earlier, you told me that NATO has done some stuff that's the reason that you don't trust them anymore. The same goes for the European Union. Can you tell us a little bit more on the things that they did that led up that you don't trust them anymore?
Well, first of all, expansion. We were, as I have already mentioned, we were given assurances that they will not expand. They are expanding. Then this just accumulations of weapons and this military planning, and NATO countries, and regrettably members of NATO and even the Netherlands, they clearly state that they're preparing for war with Russia. By 2030, there will be a war. That was just said by a number of European politicians. And that's extremely, extremely irresponsible and dangerous statements. First of all, we, as I have already mentioned, we do not have any aggressive plans. We are not going to attack anyone. But when we hear these statements, what should we just imagine, yeah? And why these statements are even more, I would say, irresponsible and dangerous, because these politicians, I don't know about but military people, they must know for sure that the war between Russia and collective West and Europe, it will not be a conventional war. It will inevitably develop into a nuclear war. And that will be the end of humanity. So those who are speaking about war with Russia, they must be aware that there will be an end to the world, to the civilization.
But this is hearing it from your mouth, that it's such a surreal thought almost, that people would want a scenario like that to come true. But you say it's inevitable when the West goes on with what they're doing at the moment.
Yeah, I hope that the reason will somehow overcome all these political approaches. I understand why all these statements are made to justify the increase of military budget, the preparation, the puffing on of military potential, and certainly it's in the interests of a military-industrial complex. Yeah, I understand, but it's not clearly in the interests of the people.
So, do you think that the whole the increasing of the budget, for example, like Rutte told the Netherlands to double, I think, or almost double in a short time? Do you think that's a financial impulse to do it that way? So not really to go to war, but to get money flowing into the military industrial complex?
Yes, I think so. It's mainly certainly to puff the military industrial complex, but these statements are very dangerous. They are very dangerous.
Why are they so dangerous?
Because there might be an escalation. All these military exercises that are being organized just near our borders, they are dangerous, because there might be a kind of a provocation, just some kind of an incident, and then there will be an escalation, and then a full-scale war.
And nobody wants that.
No.
Unless not the normal people. Yeah?
No, certainly. And Russia is the last country in the world that wants it. We do not want any confrontation with anyone. Yes, we have to exercise our special military operation in Ukraine, but that's another story.
Yeah, well, talking about Ukraine, because one of the ways on why people get behind these kind of plans and why people are really afraid of a potential war, and also are afraid of Russia as well, is obviously what happened in Ukraine the last couple of years, or at least the picture we get out of it from the media, because at least how they picture it is that Russia is doing a lot of stuff wrong in Ukraine, and they are invading Ukraine, so that we as West need to collectively raise our budgets, etc., and arm for at least defense against Russia. Maybe it's good for the listeners and for the viewers to hear your point of view on how this conflict actually happened, and maybe we can go back years ago, like from really the start, for your point of view on how did this happen and where are we now at the moment.
Yeah, you're quite right. If we want just to understand why this conflict happened, we should not start with 2022. We should go back in history. First of all, I would like to stress that Russia and Ukraine are two brotherly nations, two brotherly peoples. And even I would say that there is a point of view that I personally share, that it's one people. It's one people, Russians and Ukrainians are one people.
Do the Ukrainians feel the same?
Many. Yes, certainly there is official propaganda, official position that Ukraine has nothing to do with Russia, but it's absolutely nonsense from historic point of view, because that was one people. Yes, it was when we start from the invasion of Tatars in the 13th century. Yes, a part of Russia was occupied, was seized by the Tatars. The rest was occupied by Lithuania. At that time, it was just it has nothing to do with the present Lithuania, but it was a rather powerful state, yeah. So two parts of the present Ukraine, they for some time developed just a bit differently, yes. One under the Polish, the Lithuanian, then Polish rule, this Western Ukraine. And the Eastern Ukraine was reunified with Russia in 1654, and what is now Lugansk, Donetsk, and southern Ukraine, it was at that time uninhabited, just area.
So no one living there?
No, there were some tribes, and it was an area in the 18th century. It became an area of competition, I would say, between Russia and Turkey, and there were wars. And in the long run, this area became part of Russia, and it was civilized and inhabited by Russia, Catherine the Great constructed Kharkov, Odessa, Nikolaev, etc., So historically, these parts have nothing to do with Ukraine. But when the Soviet Union collapsed and Ukraine became an independent state, certainly it was I would say not very it was a bit difficult, just even to recognize, because there's one people. It was rather just difficult for us to accept. But anyway.
But at that time, sorry for interrupting, but at that time, so Ukraine became one country, but there were different languages and different people living.
No, there was Ukrainians. In most of Ukrainians, they spoke Russian and they still speak Russian. Yeah, and during the first, I would say, decade of their independence, Russia fully supported and I would say helped Ukraine in its just first stage of its independence. I think Ukraine mainly survived with the enormous financial, material, resourceful assistance of Russia. Yeah, and at that time, just though from the very beginning, the West, and regrettably I must stress is the West started to construct or to transfer Ukraine into a kind of an anti-Russian project, by instigating all kind of very anti-Russian feelings, by creating a kind of an artificial and false history. Yeah, by developing all kind of sentiments that were just directed against Russia, in spite of the fact that all of them spoke Russian and thought Russian, but stated that they had nothing to do with Russia. Yeah, these nationalistic feelings were instigated.
Yeah,
and then
by whom?
By the West, I would say. By the West. Certainly there were a lot of nationalists in Ukraine, mainly from the western part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So in Kiev.
No. Kiev is a Russian
Oh,
city.
Kiev, sorry. Kiev.
Lvov.
Oh, yeah.
Lvov, or just this part.
Mhm.
Yeah, because, when quite a lot of Ukrainians from that part of the country, they collaborated with Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there was this famous figure, Bandera, who is now proclaimed hero of Ukraine. Yeah, he was one of the close collaborators of Hitler, and they fought within the ranks of the Nazi Germany. But that's the minority. The majority of Ukrainians, they felt themselves as Russians. But these feelings were instigated, and then the first major crisis occurred in 2004, when there was so-called Orange Revolution, when the elected president of Ukraine, Yanukovych, was not allowed to take this post, and there was just a kind of a third round of elections that was absolutely unconstitutional. And that led to a constant crisis, within the Ukrainian society that was split. The people was split. The eastern and southern part of Ukraine, they didn't accept this just drift against Russia. So they wanted to retain brotherly relations. And all this culminated in 2014, when there is coup d'etat, when the legitimate President Yanukovych, one might have different opinions about his personality, the way how he governed the country, but he was a legitimate president. Yeah, and he was ousted in an absolutely unconstitutional way. And then very extremely nationalistic forces came to power, and they took the absolutely anti-Russian course in everything. They banning the Russian language, banning the Russian culture, just undermining this common religion, Russian Orthodox Church positions, etc.
How did they come to power?
As a coup d'etat, they ousted Yanukovych, and there was, by the way, there was a guarantee, or there were guarantees given to Yanukovych by France, Germany, I think, and Poland, and these guarantees were thrown away the next day. Yeah.
It was also by the help by some like Nazi-oriented groups as well. Right?
Yeah, and certainly the Lugansk and Donetsk regions, they didn't accept it. Yeah, they resisted against this nationalistic policy, against this just banning of all Russians, and they were immediately proclaimed terrorists. And the government, Kiev regime, started so-called anti-terrorist operation by brutally suppressing these parts of the country.
A lot of people say that that whole operation, that what you just described, was also instigated and helped by the CIA as well.
Yeah, certainly. And there is famous photos and videos of an infamous figure, Victoria Nuland, who was Assistant Secretary of State at the time of the United States, who were just in the crowd, were just instigating people to revolt, against the legitimate president of that time. So that just caused a kind of civil conflict, and the population of Donetsk and Lugansk was brutally suppressed. When we hear that the war started in 2022, that's not correct. The war started in 2014. And since, I think, from 2014 until 2022, about 9,000 civilians were killed. No one now, no one mentioned them. But these people who were killed by the Kiev forces,
Since 2014.
Yeah, just this period from 14 to 22.
9,000 people already.
Yeah, 9,000 civilians, and that's very modest figure, I would say. In reality, this figure is much bigger, but this is official figure, yeah. Yeah, so and there were constant bombardments, shelling of Lugansk and Donetsk by the Ukrainian forces, and President Poroshenko at that time he declared, "Our children will go to kindergartens, but their children will stay in basements forever." And their children. They were children of Donetsk and Lugansk, citizens of Ukraine at that time, And when it became evident in 2015 and by the end of 2014 that Kiev was not in a position to suppress Donetsk and Lugansk, then these Minsk agreements came. And these were, rather reasonable agreements that envisaged certainly the end of hostilities, the just withdrawal of heavy weapons from that region, but most important, a constitutional reform in Ukraine that could grant certain part of autonomy to Donetsk and Lugansk, and certainly that can guarantee the status of the Russian language as the second official language. It was reasonable agreements that, like for instance, they're very similar to Dayton agreements in Bosnia that were signed in, I think, in 1994, and that are still just preserve peace in this region.
What kind of autonomy would those regions get? Like, what kind of autonomy did they want?
Cultural autonomy, and certainly they can elect their own governments, their own just legislative bodies. It's a kind of a federative state, you know.
But they would still be Ukraine. Right?
Yeah. Within the Ukraine, yeah. And these agreements were endorsed by the resolution of the Security Council. But they were never implemented. And it's when I hear now that the Western statesmen say that Russia somehow didn't implement them, I would like to remind the rather cynical admission of former President of France, Hollande, and former Chancellor of Germany, Madame Merkel, and former President of Ukraine, Poroshenko, who said, "Oh no, we never intended to implement these agreements." Because
did they say that?
Yeah, they said it openly, in an interview. It's absolutely accessible to anyone. Just look in internet, you'll find it. Yeah, it was a kind of a time-gaining exercise. We needed this agreement to restructure our armed forces, to gain some strength, to gain time, and then to start again this operation against Lugansk and Donetsk. So, and this operation, these hostilities became even more brutal by 2021. And, and all these hostilities, all these atrocities were accompanied by the declaration of, at that time already, President of Ukraine, who said that we want to withdraw from Budapest Memorandum that banned the acquisition of Ukraine of nuclear weapons. We want to be a nuclear country. Yeah. And that was stated, I think, in Munich during the conference. And simultaneously, it was absolutely clear that they were preparing a huge offensive against Lugansk and Donetsk by March 2022. So we were just forced to start our just operation. We had no other choice. It was not our best choice, I would say, but we didn't have other choice, to stop it, because any responsible state can afford to have such an aggressive neighbor on its southern border. But even by the very last moment, we tried to agree with the West on the political settlement. We presented 2 draft agreements to the United States and to NATO on security guarantees. And our emissaries, our deputy ministers, they visited Brussels, they visited Washington. They tried to persuade just to go ahead with these documents, at least to discuss them.
What was in that proposal?
Well, Some basic elements. First of all, the guarantees that Ukraine will not join NATO. Then kind of just security arrangements on this western border Russia with NATO. Yeah, some just there were quite a lot of items, but they were not even discussed. No, not even they were just thrown away. Yeah. And certainly, if this dialogue started at that time, perhaps, or I'm sure, the situation would be different. And even after the start of the military operation in March 2022, we had peaceful contacts with the Ukraine in Istanbul, and we were on the verge of signing an agreement
In March 22.
in March 22. Yeah, and it was also very favorable for Ukraine because at that time what we wanted also the neutral status of Ukraine, non-aligned neutral status, the recognition of the Russian language. And we didn't even insist at that time on the autonomy of Lugansk and Donetsk, on the independence of Lugansk and Donetsk, And and the Ukrainian side was almost ready to accept it, but then it was also recognized by in many interviews. The British Prime Minister Mr. Boris Johnson called President Zelensky and said, no, go on fighting.
So you think Zelensky was ready to sign the deal and Boris Johnson was intruding?
That's how the situation is seen now, Yeah. Yeah. Now we see that this, especially with the new American administration, that is more, I would say, realistic in its approach to the situation, and with President Trump, who sincerely wants to have peace, to achieve peace. We see the situation certainly different, and it was Russia that proposed these peace talks with Ukraine, and there were already 2 rounds of these talks, contacts, and there was a memorandum handed over to the Ukrainian side by the Russian delegation. This memorandum was not published, so I can only presume what does it contain, but it's basically, I think, it is based on the proposals of President Putin that was put forward a year ago in June 2022 in Moscow, when he addressed the staff of the foreign ministry. And the main task for us, the main condition for us, is to eliminate the core causes of this conflict. And what are they? First, the recognition, certainly, of the territories that joined the Russian Federation and where there were referendums. It's certainly Crimea, then Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson regions. Then the neutrality of Ukraine, its non-aligned status, refusal to participate in any military alliances, then certainly non-nuclear status of Ukraine. There should not be any desire to regain nuclear potential. then there should be a kind of a demilitarization of Ukraine, kind of just maximum number of armed forces to be fixed in these agreements. Yeah. Not to retain this huge military machine that Ukraine now accumulated with the assistance of NATO and other countries. Then official status of the Russian language as a second language, at least that language where people can speak freely, Then certainly ban on any propaganda or glorification of Nazism, because we know all now that it's now flourishing.
In the Ukraine?
Yeah.
Is it?
Is it? Well, it's the fact that you are asking this question shows that you're not aware, but that's the fact. There are marches of this just ultra-nationalist troops with all these Nazi symbols. And Bandera is a national hero. Shukhevich is a national hero. They were all figurants of the Nuremberg process, They were just guilty of exterminating Jews, Polish, and Polish know about it. Yeah. Then certainly lifting of economic sanctions against the Russian Federation. We believe that sanctions do not do any good to both sides. We can survive. We are living with these sanctions for some years now, and it's not something that we are happy with, but it's not a kind of a very dramatic I would say factor that influences our economy. Our economy is quite solid in spite of all sanctions, and even they do us some good, because sanctions prompted the development of domestic production.
So you think now that because of the sanctions, you don't think that you feel them at all?
We feel them, certainly. We feel it. I would not be sincere if I say that we do not feel. For the ordinary people, no, we do not feel any sanctions. If you go to the streets of Moscow, no. But for the budget, for the economy, for macroeconomy, certainly there are difficulties, and certainly there are considerable difficulties in banking operations. Well, with international financial transfers,
How do you notice difference in that? Like, what makes it difficult?
For instance, it's our embassy here cannot be adequately financed from Moscow because of all the difficulties in transfers. But that's for the embassy. But for the trade, for the big companies, they create these sanctions create problems. But we can overcome them. But it also does a lot of harm to European economies.
Definitely.
Yeah. There's, for instance, cheap Russian gas that was one of the locomotives of the economic growth. Yeah, both in the Netherlands, in Germany. Now you have to buy very expensive gas elsewhere. Yeah.
Or bullshit green stuff.
Yeah. So sanctions are just a kind of a weapon that is dangerous to both sides. So lifting them will be in the interest of all. Yeah, and then certainly family reunifications of families is also very important, because a lot of families are separated, part live in Russia, others relatives live in the Ukraine. It's also very important. Yeah, and
We leven echt in een tijd van overvloed. Dat geloof ik echt. Maar toch missen veel mensen de basics. En zoals meerdere experts in de Trueman Show ook al hebben gezegd, je voeding voedt je echt al lang niet meer. Om dan nog maar te zwijgen over wat er tegenwoordig allemaal wel in je voeding zit of is toegevoegd. Soms heb je dus echt iets extra's nodig om je systeem te ondersteunen. En daarom vind ik het echt supergoed dat er iets bestaat als AG1. Het is een dagelijkse routine met vitamines, mineralen, darmvriendelijke bacteriën en adaptogenen. Allemaal in één mix, voor wie zijn basis wil ondersteunen zonder 10 potjes per dag. Ik gebruik het nu zelf een paar weken en dan neem ik het vooral in de ochtend. En ik ga eerlijk zijn, en ik had het dus niet verwacht, maar ik merk echt verschil in mijn spijsvertering en energie. Dat maakt dat het echt een super nice gewoonte is geworden. Check drinkag1.com/Trueman en je krijgt een welkomstpakket met 5 travel packs, een flesje D3 en K2, gratis verzending en 30 dagen niet goed geld teruggarantie. Zonder gedoe, gewoon een goede start van je dag. Alle info over de voordelen van de ingrediënten vind je op drinkag1.com/Trueman. De link staat ook in de show notes.
Certainly renounce of all mutual claims, including legal claims in connection with the damage caused. Because we have a lot of losses with the operations of Ukrainians, especially with all this just shelling of cities in Donbass and Lugansk, and certainly when the Ukrainians invaded the Kursk region, and part of this they managed for a certain period of time to seize a small part of the Kursk region. They practically destroyed everything, all infrastructure there. So we should and we must certainly claim the damage, the compensation, but on the reciprocal basis, perhaps we can arrange that these claims are lifted, and certainly the lifting of restrictions on the Russian Orthodox Church, because now since the Zelensky came to power, he started to suppress Russian Orthodox Church, in spite of the fact that most of the Ukrainians they are Russian Orthodox. Yeah, and so that's probably the elements of the peace plan that can be discussed. Yeah.
So that are like in bullet points,
Yeah.
Russia would need to come to peace in the region.
Yeah. And certainly there is now a lot of fuss again about Russia-Ukrainian summit. We are not against it, in spite of the fact that Zelensky is not any more legitimate president. His term of office expired a year ago.
Yeah, this I just found out recently.
Yeah.
Because he claims the war that he can't there can't be any new elections at the moment.
Yeah, but the constitution doesn't allow it. Just any expansion of powers. So the only legitimate figure now in Ukraine is the president of the parliament, because at least he was elected. Yeah, but anyway, we are not against having this meeting, but it should be well prepared. Not just to meet and to say hello and then or not say hello and then just to go in different directions. That will not do any good. The summit should be the result of a well prepared process of negotiations,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what we see also now, that the European Union is probably the main obstacle to peace.
Why is that?
Well, we hear the statements of President Macron, of Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, of Chancellor of Germany, that they say, oh no, there should not be any peace talks. There should be ceasefire, immediately ceasefire. But ceasefire without any accompanying factors is nothing. Why does Ukraine need ceasefire? Also to restore, to rearm, to reorganize, to restore its military potential, because it's now losing the war. It's evident. When the Western politicians believed that the Ukraine could win the war, when they just hoped for a strategic defeat of Russia, they said, oh, no ceasefire, go on fighting. Now, when the situation for Ukraine is much worse, they said, no, let's have ceasefire. But ceasefire by itself is nothing, as I had already mentioned. It must be at least accompanied by the ban of any military supplies to Ukraine, and the mobilization in Ukraine that is going on should be stopped at least.
So can you help, because for me the and thanks for like talking about the timeline and stuff, but in the timeline I miss a point where especially in the Western media at a certain point where like, but now Russia has invaded, for example, I don't know how you say it in Russian, but the Crimea. And that was, I think, one big moment in Western media where they were like, okay, so now the NATO and Ukraine should really like get their foot down and
Russia never invaded Crimea,
Crimea.
In 2014, when there was a coup d'etat in Kiev, Crimean people, Crimean parliament proclaimed independence. Without certainly there were no Russian troops there at that time. And then there was a referendum, and by referendum it joined Russian Federation. It was absolutely legal way. They say about Kosovo, In Kosovo there was never a referendum. But in Crimea, there was a referendum. The same referendum was in Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. People proclaimed there. They expressed their will. And then, when the Western countries speak about the United Nations Charter, the Charter was violated, the right of the territorial integrity, But the principles and norms of the United Nations Charter, they must be read in their entirety, You cannot just single out one principle. For instance, there is a principle of territorial integrity, but there is a principle of self-determination that is equally important. And these people of all these regions, they exercised their right to self-determination. There was absolutely no pressure on them. They are all Russians. They feel Russians. They want to be with Russia. They want to speak Russian, feel Russian, see Russian films, read Russian books. They do not want to be Ukrainians, as Ukrainian is now posing themselves as something, that has nothing to do with Russia. And that's it.
And is there a group of people in Ukraine who, because I know some people from the Ukraine, from the Netherlands, for example, like well-known people as well, and they like obviously they also look at this whole conflict like from a different point of view, and they also say that, but there's also a big group of people who don't want to, like, who don't feel that Russian. They do feel more like whatever European or whatever they call it, but they don't feel that Russian as you describe a lot of people in Ukraine do.
Well, yes, maybe, certainly. Then, mm, let them live in that part of Ukraine that is that will be. We do not have no intentions to occupy the whole Ukraine, just to, and we do not want to just to destroy this state as a whole. We understand that in the west of Ukraine, people feel differently. Yeah, they always felt differently. Okay, let them live there. Let them feel themselves as something different. But what we insist on, that they should not pose any threat to Russia.
Mm-hmm.
We are not going to pose any threat to them if there is a political settlement. I believe, I hope, and I'm sure that time will come that Russia and Ukraine will live as good neighbors.
As they always did, actually.
Yeah.
Can we do a short toilet break?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. So to me, it sounds like, obviously that's with every conflict, I would say, like, it's such a difficult situation now. Maybe it's not so difficult, but it seems so difficult because it's actually so old. Yeah, it's been for such a long time, and now we're just in the last like 5% part of it. But people forget like the whole history and all 95%, which came until we are here now in this 5%. But somehow I think that before there's really a solution, people should understand the 95% as well, because without understanding the other 95%, it's almost impossible to come to a good solution, because
Yes,
you will never understand the whole picture and the whole story. So do you think that there will be a solution, or is it possible even to get to some kind of solution?
I hope so. Yes, and you rightly mentioned that in order to find a solution, you should understand I would say, the core reasons of the conflict, and to eliminate them. That's what we want. And if these reasons of this conflict are eliminated, then there will be a peaceful solution. I hope so.
Isn't a part of the problem, like, it's obviously everything what's going on in Ukraine for the past years and the decades before, but isn't it, as I think you explained earlier as well, isn't one of the big reasons of this conflict as well is the expansion of NATO, and they always wanted to expand?
Yeah. Well, perhaps one of the main reasons of the conflict, yes, that NATO wanted to have Ukraine in its ranks, at least previously. Now I think some NATO members, including President Trump, they said, no, we will not be willing to admit Ukraine, because they understand all the problems that they will face with the admission of Ukraine. But certainly it started in the early years of this century, when some forces in Ukraine wanted to join NATO, and Western countries really wanted to have NATO in Ukraine in their ranks. And for us, it's a direct threat. It's a direct threat. We cannot allow it. Just since certainly, if the time comes when NATO somehow changes and will no longer proclaim Russia as an existential threat and stop its war preparations, But there will be, in this case, there will be no reason for the existence of NATO, Yeah, European Union will be quite enough for Europe just to accumulate their positions, their approaches. NATO is an aggressive bloc by per se, by definition. It was created as an aggressive bloc, as a military bloc to oppose at that time Soviet Union. Now there is no Soviet Union, so Russia.
Wasn't there a time that Russia was thinking about or maybe wanting to join NATO as well?
Well, there was time, yes, it was in the 90s. No, we seriously, we didn't want to join NATO. It was speculations in the press, but we had good relations with, at least with the headquarters, and we had even a treaty that is still in force that rules the relations between Russia and NATO. Certainly, it's not applicable now. It's a dead treaty, I would say, but it exists. It exists.
Because for me, it's like, how can you end in conflict when you have, if it's true what you're stating, that NATO is like always expanding and wanting to expand, and that's, well, what we can see the last couple of years, I would say. And if their goal is still like being that aggressive bloc which expands all the time, like the only solution for ending a conflict like this is to change the way NATO views the world and themselves.
Yeah. Yes, that's what they need. They should know. They should stop thinking in the terms of political military blocs attitude. They should somehow try to see the world differently.
Because would you say that one of the goals of NATO is like kind of world dominance?
Yeah. I cannot find any other reason for the existence.
And then it's if that's a goal, I like my brain is like, okay, well, if that's a goal, they need to change their core like thing.
Within NATO, certainly I am not going to somehow to to advise any NATO countries on something they should do. No, but even the United States, especially the administration of President Trump, they expressed the certain doubts about the real, just whether NATO is relevant. And because it's very, very expensive. And now there is just this demand to raise this military expenditure by 3.5% of GDP, which is an enormous burden on the economy of each member state. On the other hand, we see that Europeans, and perhaps you know better than me, they are now discussing the European military structures, European military forces, within the European Union. So there are different processes that are now going on.
Mm-hmm. So you think that maybe like, for example, with the United States or maybe some other countries who are in NATO as well, at a certain point they would think that, okay, maybe it's not necessary to do it this way and to change the ways.
I will not speculate on it, but I think that for the NATO, certainly, and you look at world affairs, at the present world is really needed, Yeah.
How does it, because NATO, obviously, now we're recording it and NATO top is in less than a week, I think. So when the people are viewing this podcast, I think it's right in the middle of the NATO top now in the Netherlands. Because Ukraine will be there, right? Or Zelensky will be there.
Yes, he will. I think he will be invited to participate not in the discussions, but on some kind of a protocol events, maybe for dinner or reception or something. Yeah.
How does it feel for you and for Russia that like Zelensky gets invited for that and and Russia not?
No, we are not interested in being invited to NATO summits, but with the fact that Zelensky is invited, it's once again demonstrates the aggressive nature of NATO towards Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it worry you? The not Zelensky at NATO, but like the whole situation and the situation how the world is going at the moment, like all that conflict and because Russia and Ukraine is one conflict, but you have like in the Middle East you have like another big conflict as well.
Yes. The situation now is very, I would say, complicated, and it gives a lot of reasons of great concern. For instance, yes, the latest developments in the Middle East, the strikes of Israel against Iran that we condemned. We condemned it categorically because we don't think it's appropriate to attack a peaceful nuclear installation of a sovereign state under the pretext of they were just planning to create nuclear weapons, but no one ever proved it, and there is a process, a political process that was going on to somehow to control this Iranian nuclear program. Now, with these strikes, I believe this process is over.
Because we heard this before, yeah? Like for me, I get like flashbacks to several years back when a certain president of the United States of America, Bush, was talking about weapons of mass destruction, and on that base went into Iraq.
Invaded Iraq, yes, they were never found, but Iraq was destroyed, as a sovereign state. And
what was Russia's stance on Iraq back in the day?
Yes, we accused, we categorically condemned United States. We didn't support it at all, didn't support it, and we do not support certainly the attacks of Israel, but at the same time we recognize that the retaliation of Iran also causes a lot of deaths of civilians. So we call on both parties to exercise restraint and to stop this exchange of strikes and to try to find political solution. And by the way, our president offered our assistance as an intermediary between Iran and Israel, since we have good relations certainly with Iran, but we have good relations with Israel. And it's not an alien country to us, I would say, because quite a lot of former Russian citizens are now living in Israel. So we are also concerned about their safety. Yeah. So and Russia is one of the few countries that have good relations both with Iran and with Israel. So if there is a willingness of both sides, we can assist. We can assist.
And what's the Russian stance actually on, because you say you have also good relations with Israel, but the last couple of years, what they've done in Palestine, for example, like I would say that Russia would say something about that as well.
Yeah, certainly. We also we do not we accuse, we condemn Israel of all the atrocities committed in Gaza. Yeah, but we also recognize that there were atrocities committed also by the opposite side, So the reaction of Israel was probably not proportional. It was excessive. And but if we speak about situation in the Middle East, in Israel, relations with Israel and Palestine, I think there is a solution already that was elaborated long ago, yes, by the Security Council of the United Nations. That's the recognition of a independent Palestine state by Israel, and peaceful coexistence of these two states, yeah. That's the solution.
If it goes on like this, there's no state to talk about anymore, right?
Palestine.
Yeah.
Palestine is still there. Palestine is still there. Sector Gaza is destroyed probably. Yeah. But state of Palestine is is quite a respectful member of the world community.
Mm-hmm.
And we have excellent relations with the state of Palestine. We always support their cause.
So what does Russia believe that is happening like the past couple of years in the Middle East? Like for example, with Iraq and now with Iran as well. Is there something that combines those situations?
Well, I don't think that there is any link between now the situation in Iraq and Iran. Iran is a different story. Yeah, the attacks of Israel against Iran is absolutely unacceptable. Yeah, and we saw also the developments in Syria when the new government came to power, and we recognize this, and we are ready to have a dialogue with the new authorities of Syria. Yeah, but in the long run, what the situation in the Middle East? Yes, it's very, very dangerous. It brings a lot of potential sources, of confrontation, and there should be an overwhelming solution. But the primary solution, the core solution, I would say, to the Middle East problem is the peace between Israel and Palestine.
You think if that solution is peaceful, if there's peace, then there would be potentially peace restored in the whole Middle East?
Yes, it will certainly, it will help a lot.
Do you think we will see that anytime soon?
Let's be optimistic.
I think it's always good to be optimistic. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. The differences are great, but there should be efforts. There must be efforts to bring these two parties to a kind of a common solution.
So, different subject, but what I really was curious about is at this situation at this time, how do the Russians view the Europeans and, for example, the Dutch or like other countries as well? Like after all this is happening, I can imagine that their point of view maybe also changed.
Yes, historically, Russians were very friendly to Europeans, to including Dutch people. Yes, we, for instance, European literature is very popular, has always been very popular in Russia. All the books, novels, even that are now new ones, they are immediately translated into Russian, they are read, and there is an interest in the society. Yeah, certainly, and European cinema is also popular. So there is there has never been any hostility within the Russian society towards the West. But now I would say with the recent developments, yes, the situation is a bit more different. There is no hostility. No. But there is mistrust, I would say. Yeah. So people believe that if we restore our relations with the West, we must be cautious. We must not allow to be deceived once again. And certainly we should calculate very carefully our interest, because there were a couple of times when we just helped the West in the solution of their problems without getting anything from them, without taking into account our interests.
What would like, how would the ideal world look for the Russians at this moment? Like, what would be like the ideal situation?
The ideal situation will be a peaceful, secure European continent where countries exist, taking into consideration the needs of security of each other. Security is undivisible, I would say. You cannot build your own security at the expense of security of others. Otherwise, it will not be solid. It will not last long. Because those who believe themselves as being, just undermined or whose interests are undermined, they feel that they should take revenge, or just restore their security. So if this situation takes into account the interests of anyone, that will be a solid peace. Perhaps I'm now sound idealistic, but in the long run, that's the only way. The only way.
But it's good to be idealistic. Yeah, we should be, because otherwise, I really like. For me, that's always what I think. Like when I look at all those conflicts and stuff, like it's always those governments and always those people with interest who are creating it and who are benefiting of it as well. And I think if just the people would like just look into each other's eyes and just have like a normal conversation about it, Russians, Dutch, whatever, like everyone, like it's not the people, right? I think if we would all like realize that it's not the people just want peace, and that's what we should strive for, then hopefully stuff can change.
Yeah, people. Yes, if people speak to each other, maybe they will find a solution. But regrettably, that's not possible, taking into account the existing realities. And with the Europeans, yes, I would say that regrettably we don't have any dialogue.
That's it.
Yeah, and And that's the situation perhaps is even more dangerous now than it used to be in the period of the Cold War, because at that time there were some rules of behavior, rules of the game, and there were red lines that were never crossed, and there was a dialogue. Even in some most, I would say, most dangerous periods. Now, happily, with the United States, we started to have a dialogue with the new administration. There were several conversations of our two presidents, President Putin and President Trump, and we have exchange of dialogue on the level of foreign ministries. But with the Europeans, that is not the case. That is not the case. We do not speak, we do not hear each other. The practice of dialogue is absolutely lost. And without it, I believe it's very difficult to find any solution when you don't speak to each other.
So let's hope for more dialogue, yeah?
Yeah, we are ready.
Vladimir, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dear friends, thank you also for watching and for listening. We will start recording Uncensored now. So we will get one topic and get to discuss a little bit more about that one topic. You can check that one on the streaming platform of That's the Spirit. So if you're watching there, super nice. Just click this one and you can enjoy a little bit more of our conversation. And if not, go to thatspirit.nu. And you will see this uncensored, a lot of other uncensored and content and documentaries and movies and a lot of good stuff you will definitely like. Thank you so much for listening. See you hopefully at Uncensored, and otherwise till the next time. Ciao.
Our media is much more objective when they cover the Western situation, the situation in the West.
That's what every country says.
Yeah.
The Nord Stream, because it's been big in the news as well, a couple of times here in the Netherlands, and I think in the whole of Europe.
Sometimes, certainly, I am very, very much upset to read in the local media what they write about Russia, about our foreign policy, about our domestic situation, because, it's not correct, to put it mildly. When there are some positive facts, they are just either they are silenced or they are presented in a distorted way.